Hello and welcome to The Stack. For this week's show, I speak with the new editor-in-chief for Esquire UK. We celebrate miniature books, and we also celebrate Milano with photographer Scott Schuman. Enjoy the show. From Midori House in London, this is The Stack, 30 minutes of print industry analysis, and I am Fernando Augusto Pacheco. We start the show talking with the new editor-in-chief of Esquire UK, Theo van den Broeke. Their winter issue title, For Better Man, had a redesign in form and content. It looks great. A hefty tome with 3 different covers, Jonathan Bailey, Common Domingo, and Alexander Skarsgård. It was a pleasure to welcome Theo to Midori House to talk about the new Esquire.
It's a big change, but it incorporates many of the things from the old Esquires that I loved. You know, there's the code in there, which is a kind of manual to stylish living, which is very much inspired by the manual, which Jeremy Langmead used to do when he was editor, when I arrived. And I loved how, there are a lot of things in that you might not have in the code now. So like how to put sun cream on a woman's back and that kind of thing. I don't think you need a how-to for that necessarily, I would hope. But then there's also a lot of newness. And I think the biggest shift for me is more of a tonal shift and a shift in purpose. And I think we are now living in an age where it's kind of not enough to just be a magazine that does fashion and, you know, grooming and watches and all of that stuff. I think you need to have a clear reason for existing. And for me, in the face of all of this kind of manosphere, toxic masculinity conversation that's happening now, I wanted to provide a kind of blueprint for men to be better and to celebrate good men doing good things. And I think we need a little bit more of that kind of celebratory, positive platforming, because men have been talked about like they're not really in the room for quite a long time. And I think that needs to shift. So everything that I'm trying to do with it is obviously making it stylish, making it look great, making it feel chunky, getting the ads in, doing all of that stuff. But, you know, it's also about men feeling good about being men in the best possible way.
And you set the tone beautifully on your first editor's letter as well. Very intimate, but very beautiful kind of a platform. And I like the fact that you, I know it's a bit of a cliche saying masculinity is in crisis at the moment, but you don't necessarily agree with that, right?
No, I do think it's in crisis. I do. But I think it's not so much that, maybe it's not that masculinity is in crisis. I think it's more that men have a crisis of purpose, which I think Esquire had a bit of a crisis of purpose. I think we've kind of done and been doing for so long, and we haven't really taken a step back and thought, well, why? What are we trying to achieve? Where are we going? And I think men have lost their direction and don't really know perhaps what they're for in the same way. And that's down to a lot of things. And I think rediscovering that sense of purpose and direction in a kind of contemporary sphere in a post-Me Too world is what we have to help men do. And really, I think that's about just being a good guy. And I know that sounds really trite and really easy, but I interviewed Self-Esteem for an Esquire session, one of our new events last week. And we were just talking about that idea of kind of men being empathetic and being engaged and not having to kind of be told, and knowing that they come from a position of privilege and that they can kind of step back from that and figure out how to kind of maybe disown that privilege a little bit. All of those things, being kind, being present, they add up to a good masculine whole as much as someone who dresses well or wears a nice fragrance or has an expensive watch. But they're not mutually exclusive. They can coexist, I think.
And I think your cover stars, in a way, they reflect that. They reflect this new man. I have the Jonathan Bailey, beautiful cover as well. He's gay as well. He's one of the leading actors today. We have Common Domingo, we have Alexander Skarsgård. What do you think those people have to say about this new Esquire?
It's been really, really wonderful, actually, having them, because I had an instinct about them. I've known Jonathan for a while. I hadn't actually met Coleman, I don't think. But getting to know them through the process of this, pulling together the magazine, and then buying into the idea of doing it because of the messaging. You know, we came up with the messaging first and sold it kind of into them, and they bought into it. It's been really, really authentic. There's an idea of connection and fellowship that has been manifest between them and kind of me. Like it's just lovely. Like we all care about kind of creating a better form of masculinity. And I think the way Jonathan holds himself in the world, the way Coleman holds himself in the world, the way Alex holds himself in the world, they inhabit this more present, more engaged, more thoughtful form of masculinity. And, you know, they came to the events that we've hosted to celebrate the launch because they believe in it. And it's about that kind of, I think, being connected to every part. And as a magazine, you're not just a print magazine. We know this, right? I mean, you guys know it better than anyone else. Like, you exist as a brand. You exist as a multi-platform enterprise that needs to reach all of the readers and clients and customers where they are. And for me, you kind of need to engage the cover stars on that journey too, and make sure that they're present in every part so that the reader can reach them and feel connected to them. And what's a brand but a collection of people doing things that you believe in?
Absolutely. And Theo, I have to say, I mean, the magazine looks amazing.
Thanks.
I think
it needs to look good too. It can't just all be the fluffy stuff.
It looks good. I think there's been big changes as well. Of course, now I think it's going to be published 4 times a year, or you correct me?
No, it's going up to 6 from 4.
Fantastic. And it's chunky, there are a lot of ads, but I think visually it's very stimulating as well. So tell us about some of those changes and what did you want to implement on the design of the new Esquire?
So for me, the design of new Esquire had to be really energetic. I wanted it to feel fresh. I wanted it to feel grown up. I wanted it to feel refined, but I didn't want it to feel kind of apologetic. And I think for a long time, Esquire kind of embodied and inhabited this slightly apologetic space. And I don't know whether that was because the market before kind of allowed it to do that or encouraged it to do that. But now that the media landscape has shifted to such a degree, I think Esquire has a real opportunity to own its space and to be this kind of preeminent men's title, beacon of kind of elegance and style and kind of locally driven fun and energy. And, you know, we got this new art director, Jerry Dempsey, who's fantastic, joined us from Telegraph Luxury. And she just fully bought into my vision and has brought it to life so beautifully. And, you know, I look at the book now and I'm like, oh God, there are some pages where I'm just like, I hate that. And I need to stop doing it because I'm a perfectionist and I'm only pulling out the bits that I'm not convinced by. But it's a process, right? And as long as it's got the kind of right contributors and the right energy, I think it's fine. The big joy for me has been bringing together people I admire. So whether that's stylists, photographers, illustrators, the team, creating a space where they can come and do what they do best has been an absolute joy. And slightly, maybe not a surprise, but it hasn't been something I necessarily expected because I've always operated kind of as a bit of a lone being. You know, I've been out in the market, I've done my thing, I've written my copy, I've posted my things on Instagram, whatever it is. Like, I've been that kind of jobbing style journalist, whereas now actually being a kind of conductor of a team that's both in the office and external, that has been absolutely amazing to discover the joy of that, and being on a call with the talent and the photographer and the stylist and people you've wanted to work with for years and creating something together and allowing people to inhabit what they do best and encouraging them and providing the space, of which there is limited space now, you know, as we know, has been fantastic.
And tell us about the team. I mean, of course, you worked at Esquire before. When I saw kind of the masthead, I recognized some names here and there. But did you wanted to hire new people? So how was that?
Yeah, a few of the team members have been there for a long time. So Miranda Collins, the deputy editor, she's been at Esquire for 20 years, and Miranda's a fantastic journalist and a great right hand to me. And our art director left, so we got Jerry. Johnny Davis, who is our luxury director. I've worked with Johnny for years. He's fantastic in the watch space. I've hired Zach Maui, who I used to work with at GQ as my style director, and he's just beloved by the industry and really knows his stuff. So I'm trying to gather really bright, brilliant people who know their space, but also understand that, and this is really vital, that we are not just a print product. We're not just a website either. We are a social platform. We are an events business. We are a newsletter business. We are a merchandising business. We are about connecting people. We are a brand, you know, and the people that work at Esquire now need to kind of fully understand that and embrace all those touch points with equal care and reverence, I would say. And that's hard. That's a big shift for me also. I went and worked at Soho House for a couple of years before Esquire, this iteration, and learned a lot about brands and what it takes to build a brand, and for customers to understand what your brand is about and where you position yourself in the market. And I think that has been invaluable learning for me. And I'm trying to impart that into the team, and everyone's super receptive and excited by it, because therein lies success. Hopefully, fingers crossed.
And you do need some reverence when we discuss Esquire. I mean, it's an incredibly influential magazine with an amazing history, right? I mean, all the best photographers and writers have worked for Esquire, right?
Totally, yeah. I mean, think about F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ernest Hemingway, Truman Capote, and more recently, A.A. Gill had a column for years there when I was working with Alex Bilmez. Alex was his editor, my editor. Photography-wise, I feel like we have an opportunity actually now to really up the kind of fashion output, and the photographers and the stylists we work with. I think they've slightly come second to the writers in the past, and the writing is incredibly important and central to what we do. Journalism needs to be absolutely tip-top, but I think we can bring in really exciting voices in photography and styling. I worked with Robert Rabensteiner on the Jonathan Bailey cover, and I've admired Jonathan from afar. Robert, and Jonathan too. Robert from afar for years, his personal style, his way of styling, and it was just such a privilege to work with him. And the proof is in the pictures. You can see it. It's a master at work. He is absolutely brilliant at what he does.
It's elegant. I mean,
so elegant.
I think you're kind of bringing back this elegance as well to menswear, well.
Do you know what one of my big references was? The Liz Tilberis Harper's Bazaar cover? There was that whole blow-up podcast series about it, which I would encourage anyone to listen to after this, of course. But her first cover for Harper's Bazaar, when it was a real competitor to American Vogue, was this amazing picture of Linda Evangelista against white with a kind of swan-like neck. And she's holding the R of Bazaar, a bit like Coleman is holding the E of Esquire, or the S of Esquire. I can't remember which letter he's holding on my cover. And the strapline is "Enter the Era of Elegance." And I couldn't steal that, but I kind of wanted to, because that's kind of what I want to do. I'm so fed up with schlumpy styling, and it, it had its place, and there was a reason why it existed, and it was a response to what went before. Of course, I understand that, but men want to look good. Men want to look sexy. Sexy without being trashy, but men will look sexy. And I want to facilitate that. And it was interesting looking at the covers as a whole, the three covers with Alex, Jonathan and Coleman. I hadn't actually realised that they were all kind of wearing a form of like a black suit, really. And it works cohesively. They're all very different. Really, Jonathan's wearing a Dior velvet frock coat with black trousers and the coat is blue. But there is a consistency, and it's about silhouette. It's about cut. It's about that refinement. And I just want people to feel when they come and are featured in the pages of Esquire that they look their absolute best. And they're going to want to put that in a frame on their wall until they look old and wrinkly and don't have that same silhouette to show off.
Thank you very much, Theo van den Broek there from Esquire UK. The winter issue is out now. Pick your favorite out of the three covers. And now we head to Milano to speak with photographer Scott Schuman, aka the Sartorialist, who is based in the city. For Taschen, this coming January, he is releasing the Sartorialist Milano, a stylish photographic tribute to Milan featuring a foreword by the late Giorgio Armani. The book captures nearly 20 years of Schuman's fascination with Milan. It was a pleasure to speak with Scott about the book and why Milano is so special.
When I was growing up, Milan, of all the fashion capitals, when I started to fall in love with fashion, and it was the most mysterious. It was the one that was the hardest to find out about. Everyone can find out easily about London and Paris and New York. Milan was kind of mysterious. There was so much great work, whether it was fashion or design, coming out of this place. But it was so hard to find, especially pre-internet. I grew up in the 80s. And so, there were no movies set in Milan. There were not big articles and things set in Milan. So there was something about that mystery that always kept me very intrigued. And when I moved here, I just decided to live my fantasy of what my dream of Milan could be.
And of course, in the book, people should expect the very elegant people of Milano that we all know. But I think you wanted to show something different as well, perhaps a side of the city, that's not necessarily just kind of people that would attend a fashion show, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've been shooting here for almost 20 years. I wanted to show the Milan that I see, the Milan that I really appreciate, which is, not only the very elegant gentleman, but, the workers, the athletes, the architecture, the sports. And, a book is always a chance for me to challenge myself a little bit. And so, I went past just the street and past just what people were wearing. And, I think the best pages in the book probably have a person on one page and a place on the other, and something about it, kind of whether it's the color or the shape or the silhouette, whatever, something ties them together. Yeah, I think it's a book that the Milanese will recognize. They'll say, oh yeah, that's my city. And people outside will say, oh, Milan looks kind of cool. It's more dimensional than I thought. So I'm really proud of that. I'm really proud of the mix I was able to get in the book.
I mean, we must talk, about the book itself. It's beautiful. And the way it starts, I mean, you literally start with some words from, of course, the late Giorgio Armani. Tell us about his involvement in the book. And I think, that was your first idea when you thought about the book, right?
Well, as soon as Taschen said that they would do the book, of course, I went to Armani he was my first choice of somebody to write the foreword. Even though I had been going to the shows for a long time, I knew him a little bit, but, I just turned 58, and time gives you a little clarity on things. And I think I had always kind of known that I only have a couple of heroes. And he, as a hero, to me, was more important to keep him as a hero than to work with him or trying to work with him or trying to be too close. And so I always kept a little distance. I wanted to be able to see it from the outside, and so I wasn't sure if he would write it, and he did. It was a big, very important to me. I was very curious what he was going to say, and so it was really a great thing that he agreed to do that.
I think it makes the book even more special as well. And, Scott, it's funny, you mentioned when you grew up in the 80s, Milan was mysterious, but one thing is interesting, I mean, and perhaps it's, it's very recent, we're reading many stories about people moving to Milan. I think the city is kind of buzzing. Even here in Monaco, there are events like Saloni del Mobile, which attracts millions of people every year. There's something about the city now as well that is quite alive. Some people might think of this idea of a state city, perhaps things don't move along, but actually that's not true.
Oh yeah, no, I think it's by far the most international city in Italy. It's the least like a museum of all the, the big cities. I think this is the epic that Milan takes its place along, the big cities of Italy and next to Rome and Venice and Florence, because this is Milan's epic. I mean, if ancient history was Rome's epic and the 1700s was Venice and the 1500s was Florence, the 20th century is Milan. You come here, and I like to say, I don't know if it's completely valid, but I like to say Milan feels like the best neighborhood in New York. It's got everything New York has in its best neighborhood. It's got all the shopping. You can make it around the city on foot. It's got great restaurants. It's got everything that neighborhood has. It just doesn't have Queens. I guess Queens is maybe Monza, but, it's a hot city. We've got great people moving here from all over the place. The city is taking a step to be more modern without losing the things that make it really special. There's more bike lanes. When I started coming here, there was no food delivery. Nobody got food delivery at their house. There's bigger grocery stores, but at the same time, there's still all the little shops. There's the butcher, and there's still shoe repair places. Like in New York, there's hardly any shoe repair places anymore or there's very few because everyone wears sneakers, and you can't repair a sneaker really. So here you still have all those things that make a special little Italian city viable and Italian, while still starting to slowly add on international touches. And I think it makes it the most charming city in Europe.
And Scott, one thing every time I go to Milan, and I have to say, it is inspirational how, older men and women, they dress and the sense of care. It is very special. I mean, and that's why, of course, the shooters, they became quite famous as well. But, it's men and women. What do you have to say about this? They have something perhaps to teach all of us, about aging in a way as well.
Yeah, I mean, America is so youth obsessed, French also a bit, maybe in London it's not quite as obsessed, but here they have a reverence for older people, and older people here, they don't give up. I think in America, after you get a certain age, you kind of fall out of the cycle of fashion. You feel that you're not seen. Everything's built for the younger generation. Here, you still have women in their 80s, who look like they are running the house. They dress like they are running the house. They're running a small corporation, which is of the house, or maybe they run a small corporation. But, here they just don't give up. I mean, look at someone like Armani. When he was in his mid 70s, looked like he was in his mid 40s. He looked great. Physically, he looked great. His brain, he was working and being creative. And the women that you see here, they don't, when they get older, they don't dummy it down. They still look really chic and they know how to dress their age. The gentlemen also, and I think it also comes down to, it's a very sustainable city. There's money here, but they're not super rich. There are, of course, some super rich, but most everybody here is just kind of upper middle class. That's why you see so many bike shots that I take here. I love that so many people go to work dressed in a suit, on a bike or in a dress or in high heels, that they wear those clothes because that's the clothes they have. They don't have humongous wardrobes. All their clothes are very well thought out. There's still a lot of repair, like I said, shoe repair and clothing repair. So they really take care of those clothes, but they don't have infinite closets. So when they go to get dressed every day, it's usually something pretty, I want to say chic, but just considered. I think that's the word I keep coming back to. It's considered. It's the way it fits. It might not be cashmere. It might be a merino wool, but it fits right and the pants fit right. And that's what really makes a lot of these people who, even if they're not super rich, makes them look so well put together, is that it looks considered and it fits them and it looks like their clothes and they're not just chasing trends. And I think that's the biggest difference between what I see here and what I grew up in New York or in Indiana or even what I see in Paris.
And I was going to say, is this your favorite city to photograph, perhaps?
Oh, yeah, definitely my favorite city to photograph because there are so many different types of people here in a small place. You've got really elegant older women, you've got cool young women, you've got cool young guys, you've got very elegant men, you've got workers, they're still into sports. They don't like to go to the gym, so they do a lot of outdoor sports, soccer and running and bicycling and all of this. So it's just has a lot in a small space. But, at the same time, I've concentrated on shooting here the last couple of years to do the book. And I'm ready to start doing a little more, getting back out to the world. My book before this was a book on India that I also did with Tasha. I think life is most interesting when you're going back and forth between a new culture and your culture, the culture that you're used to, and learning something new and then diving deeper into something you already know. It's a great place, because it's so centrally located, so it's very easy to go to Africa. It's very easy to go to other places.
And if I may be cheeky, just to end here the conversation, of course, you did this beautiful book about India as well. Where would you like to go as well? Not necessarily you need to have a project, but which places in the world perhaps you want to go?
I have two next book ideas. The next book idea I'd love to do is something like Sartorialist World, where I'm shooting a lot of different cultures, and mixing, pages facing each other, a rapper from Miami next to a worker in Hong Kong or something. And what ties them together is either the color or the pattern mixing or something. So, I've already been to India a lot. I've been around the US a lot. I've been around Europe a lot. So, it's more Africa. I'd love to go to Ethiopia. I'd love to go to Senegal, something like that. Mm-hmm. But also Cambodia, Vietnam, some more South America, Bolivia. All of that to me is what really keeps your eye curious, because when you're mixing the way people dress culturally, the way they see color, the way they see mixing prints. When I was doing the India book, there's a group, I guess they come from the same village, and they work all in this market, and all the men from this village dress in a different plaid. And it's all, the lungi is one plaid, the shirt's a different plaid, the head wrap's a different plaid. And so when you're a creative person, you think, the idea of just taking one pattern and playing with the scale of it or playing with the colors, whatever, is so inspiring. So with a book like that, I think I would love to have it where creative people look at it not for being other cultures, but to challenge them to look at things that maybe they already know in a different way. And that's how you get around cultural appropriation, things like that. You don't what you see, but you let yourself be inspired by it. And so I think we could use a book like that now, especially.
Thank you, Scott Schuman there. The Sartorialist Milano, published by Taschen, will be out in January. And now let's talk and celebrate miniature books. A new exhibition featuring Veronica Ditting's miniature book collection will be on display at Tender Books from the 16th of December. It was a pleasure to welcome her and Chodha, writer and consultant, to our studio.
My parents used to have some miniature books, one of them that I have in front of me, which is about sort of different quotes. Then another one that we had a lot of translation miniature books that we would take on vacation. So whenever we were traveling to that specific country, we would buy a miniature book for these languages. And I kept these since the 80s. And that's in a way what started my interest in collecting more. So over the years, I started collecting some dictionaries, some novels. And from there, the collection grew to more conceptual art pieces.
And because you're very serious, when you say miniature, it is miniature. For people that are not here in the studio, they are very small. I wonder, do you have a rule for that?
Yeah, for me, miniature books, they have to be smaller than sort of the palm of your hand. Anything that's larger already sort of doesn't categorize as a miniature book for me.
Strict. I like it. And are you part on this whole thing as well? You will be talking to Veronica at a special interview there at Tender Books. So tell us a bit more about how does it work? And you do this series of interviews for Tender Books, right?
So my relationship with Tender Books, I guess, began during or as we were coming out of lockdown, because I suddenly, like we all were, really began thinking about spaces and what they're used for. And a bookstore, all sorts of shops, particularly during that time in our lives, felt really redundant, but also incredibly necessary. A lot of us were reading more or had aspirations to collect more, printed matter in particular. So I reached out to Tamsin at the time and then just slowly sort of edged my way in as somebody that could be a sounding board for her and for ideas to come through the shop. Because for me, I was very excited about this space that exists in central London, which is becoming increasingly rare, as you can imagine, with all of the challenges that comes with. But really think about how we can activate it beyond just selling things and selling beautiful things, but actually it becoming a place where people can come together and discuss their love of print or words or pictures or whatever that might be. I think if you do love words and pictures and print, you know Veronica. And, having been the recipient of many of the things that she's made before for Hermes and various other people, when that arrives in the post, I think one of the first kind of messages I ever sent to Veronica was just the excitement and the squeal I made once I'd kind of opened an envelope of something. I can't even remember what it was, but there was something very, very emotional about the thickness of the invitation, the snap of the pages and the weight. And it really blew my mind. I knew that there was more to the way that Veronica was making things that a lot of people would maybe think of as quite ephemeral material. And so my knowledge of her and her practice and just her taste over the years has kind of grown. And I thought that this was a really interesting way of revealing to people how serious she really is about making things that can seem quite fun and in some cases quite silly, because a small book, a miniature book, it's kind of stupid. I mean, the earlier ones we're talking about did have very specific needs. They were worn on the body or they were kind of used in traveling, so they were small for practical reasons. But of course, in today's day and age, is there need for a small book? And I think that's something I was interested in questioning with this exhibition that we're doing together.
And I love you mentioned the word silly, because at the same time that they can potentially be silly, but there's what I find it fascinating is the level of precision as well, because there's whole sorts of techniques, right, to make a book like this. Wouldn't you say so?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the ones that I have in front of me, they're all legible. They've all been designed exactly at that scale and that for that purpose. For example, I have some antique dictionaries, like thumb dictionaries, or again, more sort of translation books, or I even have a little Gutenberg Bible, which was printed in the 1960s, based on the original Gutenberg Bible that was printed in 4055. And yeah, it is indeed, it's kind of a bit of a joke that, for example, this one is only 5 by 5 millimeter large, but it actually works. You can actually read it. One of these things, the scale, the ratio, how you hold it in your hands is also something that I obviously value, and that in a way sort of translates also into my own work, if it's either for miniature publications or invitations that I have designed before, or if it's also on a larger scale as well. So the aspect of functionality, and that is also a fun little object, I really like. It doesn't take itself too seriously.
And one thing, because it does relate to your work, is it true that when you are creating something, you play around with formats as well? So do you always do like a mini version?
I mean, not always, but most of the time, yes. If there's, for example, I don't know, I'm working on a publication and I just want to see sort of the rhythm of the pages, or for image editing purposes, we might print a very small version, or even, sometimes, for example, envelopes are always really difficult to print in your studio because of the size. So we always make a smaller version just to see how, for example, the color arrangements work, or the way that the flap opens, or, it's really kind of like a test for the real thing. And sometimes the test becomes the real thing. Yeah.
I love that. And our question, besides, of course, the conversation, all these amazing kind of books that Veronica brought us here, you will be able to actually buy some of those books as well, right? And that's interesting. So people can actually go and have one for their collection. Maybe they can start collections as well.
Well, I think all the impetus for anything that we're doing here, and in my own career, there are so many different things that I'm doing that don't really seem to relate to each other, but it's really important. And the energy, I guess, that I can maintain is in trying to find the point that I'm doing all these random things. So in this instance, particularly with knowing that a lot of these books are Veronica's kind of own. And I guess there was an unofficial nod in my mind about Tamsin, who is the director of Tender Books. Every time I mentioned we should do a Christmas window, she always winces because there are sort of cliches around, Christmas time. But, it's a shop in central London, so, and I love a tree. So I'm always kind of trying to shoehorn in something that feels festive without it obviously falling into that cliche. I think internally at the shop, we were talking about, small books and the number of smaller titles, some of which will be selling from like Hanuman editions, the re-edition there, different things that have been coming in through the store that have taken a much smaller format. And so there is a kind of move, there's a kind of desire for people to want to have this format again. So it felt like the right time also to sell a selection of those kinds of smaller editions at the same time as presenting them alongside the history of what a kind of short history, if you like, through Veronica's archive, but presenting them side by side. So both of the ones for sale will be in the window next to Veronica's own. And because I guess another thing that I'm always really interested in is sort of destabilizing that hierarchy of this is kind of old, this is serious, this is kind of worth more than this. Whereas actually once you see it mixed in with things that you can actually buy today, you start thinking a little bit more intelligently about scale, about how we read things and how we consume words and images, which is, I think, the thing that all of these books kind of force us to do.
And I know it's not necessarily mini, but I'm going to throw a polemic as well, perhaps to you, Dol, and to you, Vero, that, I don't know, there was a time where magazines were large formats, the big was better.
Oh, yeah.
But I see things are changing as well, that small was actually amazing as well. I think I see some experimentation in that, very serious, titles actually becoming a little bit smaller as well. What did you say? So this is just a controversy I'm throwing out there.
Yeah, I guess that people are maybe, generally speaking, if you really look at printed matter, there's obviously less produced. If you work in print with printed matter, you see a lot of printers are actually closing down and paper mills are reduced and so on. So there's definitely been a huge development in the last couple of years that's not very positive. But on the other hand, I think because it's much more maybe rare to also do a very sort of full project, maybe people are a little bit more curious about sort of testing how it could look,
And you can still look very cool and small, you know.
Yeah, there is something weird about, I guess, you know, a lot of people talk about the size of our phones and how you know, a lot of the information we look at is to that scale. So you would imagine that these kinds of books are sort of just reconfirming, I guess, how our eyes have adjusted to scale. But I think everyone is so aware of and overwhelmed by how huge the internet is. So just to liken that kind of large-scale magazine of the ones that I know you're talking about from the early 2000s, you know, there was this kind of desire to essentially reproduce Egoist from the 70s, right? It's A3, it's kind of bigger, it's kind of obnoxiously big in the best way that you need to really pay attention to it to flick through. It's the kind of anti-flicking through, right? You need to make space for it. And whereas that doesn't feel modern anymore, and that doesn't feel at all inviting, I think, to people. I think through my teaching, I kind of see a real haptic kind of the haptic knowledge that my students have is it's there's a break there. You know, they don't really respond to the things that are held in their hands. They don't read information in that way. So actually the intimacy that you can have with something at this scale really just offers a new connection that I think a whole generation of people haven't really been schooled in.
Intimacy is a good word, I think, for those. And by the way, what I'm fascinated is about the variety. We have the Lord's Prayers, but we have something saucier as well. I think one of my favorite, if you don't mind talking to us, I think is the Suntory catalog.
Yeah.
I mean, where is it actually
this
from the
one
collection?
here.
I think it's a beautiful piece of work, actually. I should actually touch it. Let me
You may.
It's smaller than my palm as well.
Yeah.
Describe, say what you see.
Well, I see a beautiful picture. I presume this is from the 60s, maybe?
I believe so, yeah.
I believe so.
Yeah.
There's a picture of, you know, a naked woman here with some Japanese poetry, perhaps. I do not read Japanese.
It was actually, I mean, I found out it's
not poetry.
I received this as a gift, and after my exhibition in Japan from the curator and her husband, and it's actually advertising for Suntory whiskey, but there's naked women and yeah, potentially poems. I'm not quite sure.
Potentially poems here.
Yeah.
And how do you feel presenting all those books to a larger crowd? I mean, because as I said, you know, perhaps they were quite intimate, but now they will be out there for everyone to see.
Yeah, no, I mean, I will have about 90 different miniature books on show, and in a way, the whole diversity of the content, but also the way that they look. You know, for example, here I have like a little Leporello from Dieter Roth and Robert Filiu, a Fluxus artist, that really spreads out. It's small, but it actually really takes over a lot of space. So I do love exploring sort of the idea of the space and ratio something takes. And yeah, it's kind of, I didn't really think about showing them before as such. I had them in Japan at my show at DDD last year as sort of a collection of books as a reference to the Gentleman Miniature magazine I made in 2020. But I never really considered showing them as a collection. So when Dahl asked me for this opportunity, I thought it's a lovely way to sort of, reveal it to an audience.
And all everybody likes good merch. I can see a small bag there called Small Print. Will people be able to buy there as well?
That was actually Veronica's idea. Veronica's getting into merch now.
Yeah.
We've got to admit, we do love some merch. I'm sorry.
But it was really, it was fun for us to think about all together, actually, you know, between Veronica's studio and myself and at Tender Books, really, just playing with what could we make, what would also make sense. You know, I'm a deeply practical person. So though I like merch, it has to be merch that's kind of doing something. And in this case, we have we have 2 canvas tote bags that are, what are the actual proportions? Do you know what they are?
Oh, God, I think it was 18 by 25 or something like that. So it's not really mini, but small.
It's not mini,
enough.
but it's a curious size, and actually kind of one that is quite an interesting exercise in really editing how much you're carrying around with you. We'll have those, and then potentially some other things as well.
And tell us, for everyone who is listening, so from the 16th of December, right? But then there will be a few weeks, actually, that's going to be on show.
Yeah, so the opening is on the 16th of December. So you can come and meet us there and have a chat. And then it lasts till the 6th of January.
That's fantastic. And guys, I don't want to throw you on the spot, but are you excited for next year, work-wise? I mean, I'm just throwing this question out there. I want to hear from both of you. If you have anything to say, now is the time.
No, I think, maybe what we were discussing like the idea of sort of tactility is something that, it's always prevalent in my work, but maybe I will push that even more. I feel like it's sort of the time to do things the way that you sort of think is right.
It's a beautiful one.
And I think the festive period is a time where you are surrounded by, a lot of us are surrounded by our old stuff, those of us that visit family and have that kind of strange interaction with our past selves. I've never had a Christmas in the last 20 years where I haven't opened this drawer under my bed and found all the things that I used to look at.
A miniature book.
So I think there's something about that that's nice to kind of, it forces you to revisit perhaps a past self. And I think through doing that, it's only going to kind of make whatever projects come my way next year all the more important.
Thank you very much, Veronica and Dal. And of course, you'll be able to see the collection at Tender Books here in London from the 16th of December to the 6th of January. And that's it for this week's show. My thanks as ever to our editor, Jack Jewers. Any comments or queries, feel free to write to me, Fernando, at fb@monocle.com. And remember, we're back next Saturday at 10 a.m. London time. Meanwhile, you can always listen again at monocle.com or subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You've been listening to The Stack. I'm Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.